This is the guide on how to ace the analytical question of your PM interview. We're going to start by talking about the different kinds of questions you might face and how to form strategies and frameworks around each of them. To start with, A/B testing questions. A/B testing questions seem really daunting, but they're actually quite simple. For an A/B testing question answer that's perfect, you basically need to think about the A/B testing question like a science experiment. So each science experiment has a hypothesis, methodology, and expected results. There's a detailed guide in this lesson that talks about how exactly to use a framework that helps with A/B testing questions. That said, I generally recommend focusing more on the principle than on the exact framework. Understand that every A/B test is essentially a science experiment. You're showing a screen that shows design A versus a screen that shows design B, and seeing what metrics are boosted depending on which design the users are getting. This is a really helpful tool for product managers to understand which features are worth launching and which features are actually going to cause negative metrics overall. The one tip I have with A/B testing questions is to always make sure to mention trade-offs. It's great to do a quantitative analysis and understand that if we increase the button size by 50%, we'll drive higher click-through rates, but there's always something missing from that analysis. Think and tell me about what are the ways that making that button bigger might actually cause a detrimental experience to the users. So an example of how a button increase might actually cause a detrimental experience might be something like perhaps the button takes away too much traffic and users don't even notice the other buttons on the page. And then they get confused in a flow that they hadn't already even wanted to go into. So just make sure to mention qualitative as well as quantitative analyses when you're doing A/B testing questions. The next major type of A/B testing question is a metrics question. And this is a really common one. It comes in the form of what are the top 3 metrics of YouTube? Or what metrics should we focus on if we're making Gmail over again? Generally, what you want to do is understand the goals of this product, the actions that support that product, support that goal, and the metrics that you'll use to measure that outcome. So to repeat it again, we use something I found online that's just this great framework called the GAME framework. So GAME, goals, actions, metrics, and eventually an explanation, of course. So first, when you're asking any questions about goals, understand what it is that YouTube even wants to do. Let's say we're focusing on the YouTube question. What is it that YouTube wants to do this year or this quarter? What do you think are the priorities that YouTube should focus on? Now that you've defined the priorities, let's say it's watch time, that you want to increase the number of hours watched on YouTube, then we can talk about the actions that support that goal. So for example, watching videos is a really common action that would support that goal. Perhaps also authenticating, getting the users signed in, would also help support that goal, because when we look at the data, we see that signed in users use YouTube with a much higher frequency than signed out users. Do you kind of get, so hopefully you get a picture there of kind of how that works. The third step, now you're drilling deeper and deeper, you're getting into metrics. So how do we use metrics to actually make sure we're measuring those actions? An example of a metric that might measure the actions we're talking about is sign-in rate. So given a user that visits our YouTube page, how likely are they to sign in? How many users are authenticated on our platform? These kinds of numbers will help give us a sense of, okay, we can see that there's an increase in metrics. If we drive this metric forward, we'll actually get closer to the goal that we originally set out in the beginning. So we're essentially taking the goal, boiling it down to the actions that a user would take that supports that goal, and then boiling that down even further to the exact metrics that we want to watch that will support those actions that will support that goal. And at the very end, re-explain what you've just gone through and talk a little bit about the qualitative analyses that you might have done along the way. Perhaps increasing watch time and driving that metric higher will actually create an addicted user base that hates YouTube because of how unproductive they've become as a result of using the platform, as an example. And then the third type of question that we want to cover in the analytical question is the execution question. So execution questions are can be very, very different. In PMLesson, we've created an execution question centered around flip phones. But generally what you want to do is think about how this product will work in practice. So if you're actually in charge of this product and actually launching it, what are the steps required? What do you have to do? Do you want to talk to partners and work with them to launch products? Do you want to work with users and get marketing out there and get marketing outreach, press releases, really just kind of thinking critically about the stages that it takes from a finished product internally to an executed product externally and what it takes to get there. So this really involves heavy go-to-market strategy analyses. I would strongly encourage you to check out the lesson that we've created under this section, which has more detailed analyses of how to go about thinking about some of these questions. But if you have any questions, feel free to message in the Slack group. Great. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to analytical questions from PMLesson, and good luck with your interview prep.